Have you ever spent hours practicing scales, but when it comes time to solo, everything sounds boring or robotic? Well, after teaching hundreds of intermediate guitarists, I discovered one simple shift that changes everything. It instantly makes your solos sound more melodic, expressive, and a lot less like you're just running up and down scale patterns. So in this video, I'm going to show you what exactly that mindset shift is and how you can start using it today to break out of the scale box and finally start sounding like a real musician. One of my students that I've been working with for some time now has gotten to a really good point in their guitar playing where they can play every single triad shape. They know every kind of major scale pattern and they know all the pentatonic positions as well. But the frustrating part is when all that improvisation happens, everything still sounds mechanical. And when I kind of helped him and looked a bit closer, I saw what was going wrong. But real quick, if you want to become a student of mine that gets some real results like the one I'm going to talk about today, check out my website. You can get started through the link in the description. But here's the root cause of the issue. When we learn a scale, we usually practice it in sequence. So just moving from one note at a time, moving in intervals of tones and semitones. There's nothing wrong with that at all. This is how we integrate a shape into our long-term memory. We need to understand that the goal of practicing this way is specifically for memorization. So when I play like a G major scale pattern, the reason I'm playing it this way, going one note at a time like this, is specifically to memorize this shape on the fretboard. Now, the problem on the guitar comes when we use that same pattern for memorization to also create music. This is kind of like memorizing a map, but you never actually use the full extent of your knowledge, and you only ever drive and travel in one straight line. Like you never take any kind of unexpected turns or anything like that. What you end up with is phrasing that sounds exactly like what you get, just a scale run, right? There's no tension, there's no surprise, there's just stepwise motion from one note to the next. That is exactly what was happening with my student. That was the exact problem that he had. He'd play phrases that stayed in the exact same order that he practiced them in order to memorize those scale shapes. And as a result, everything sounded predictable. This student that I was working with was really frustrated by this boring scale problem, and he was always amazed by how great guitarists could make scales sound interesting, but when he would use the exact same shape himself, he was stuck doing the exact same patterns over and over and over again. So my student had told me that he'd been studying from this Robin Ford tab book. This guy over here, pretty cool book, right? So we opened it up and I immediately noticed something interesting from one of the licks that he showed me inside of that book. Robin Ford obviously doesn't just walk up and down in scale patterns the same way that we kind of practice them, right? What stood out to me was how Robin Ford was leaping between different intervals inside of his licks and phrases. He often skips to like thirds and fifths and even sixths to make the phrases sound more interesting. This is one of the phrases that stood out to me inside of that book. So that was like a little like phrase over an E major chord, and it sounds really kind of like tasty and kind of colorful. Now these intervallic leaps, the large jumps that you make, is what's going to give your phrasing color and surprise. Like you can see over here, at the end, he plays this major sixth interval over here. When you make bigger jumps between your notes, your melodies become less predictable and way more interesting to the listener. I want you to think of the intervals like seasoning and spices that you add to a dish. The closer your interval is to a starting note, the more predictable the melody is going to be. However, the further away the interval is, the more unexpected and interesting and surprising that direction of the melody is going to be. For example, like your major and minor seconds, they're really close to like a root note. So like if I take the note C over here, a minor second is just a semitone and a major second is a tone. They're really close. You can kind of think about these minor and major seconds like salt and pepper, right? They're just kind of like basic. However, the notes that are further away, like for example this major seventh, it's a lot spicier. It's kind of like a spicy chili. It's more surprising leaping to here than leaping to there. So let's look at all the intervals we have inside of an octave. From C, I have that minor second, which is just a semitone. I have that major second, which is a tone. Then I have that minor third, which is 3 notes above. Then I have that major third, 4 notes. Then I have a perfect fourth, which is 5 notes. And then I have a tritone, which is 6 notes. What's important about the tritone is that it's halfway between the root and an octave. So this is the halfway point between all of our intervals. So then after the tritone we have a perfect fifth, which is 7 notes. Then a minor sixth, which is 8 notes. A major sixth, which you can play like this, or this, which is 9 notes. A minor seventh, which is 10 notes. A major seventh, which is 11 notes. And then the octave, which is 12 notes. So right there, I'm just kind of running through every single chromatic note till I get back to C. Again, the closer these notes are to the root note, the kind of more expected it's going to sound, the more predictable. However, when I make bigger jumps, it's kind of more surprising and unexpected. So let me show you some examples of this in melodies and riffs that we've all heard before. A great example is the Black Sabbath riff. Really iconic, right? So if we break down what's going on here, we have the root note, which is this F sharp. And then we play an octave, again, the biggest jump that you can make, right? And then to this tritone. These large jumps make things really surprising. He does like a really cool kind of trill over here from that fourth to the tritone. Again, let's say I added in every single kind of scale note around here, around this F sharp minor. The melody would kind of be ruined. It would sound so much less interesting. So let's say I went like... It's just, there's less going on, right? Because we kind of fill out every single kind of gap with the scale notes, we kind of, our ear can kind of tell the direction that things are heading in, right? Like, it sounds like we're supposed to be going there because I'm walking everyone along to that note, right? Whereas if it's just... it's kind of more surprising. Again, what about a different melody? What about like the melody to the Star Wars theme? It goes like... Again, what immediately jumps out is going from like that root to the fifth. It makes it sound kind of like powerful and impactful. Anyway, kind of just messing around with Star Wars, but you kind of get the idea there behind the intentionality of the intervals you use in your melodies. That's what creates melodies that sound interesting and impactful and surprising, and that's what helps us break free from these kind of boring scale patterns. So when we go back to looking at how we practice these scale shapes in order to learn them and get them inside of our memory, we can see that we're always playing either minor seconds or major seconds by going up in either tones or semitones. And when we try and do this exact same pattern when we're trying to make music, it quickly becomes boring and predictable if that's the only thing we know how to do. Again, an advanced chef needs to know how to season dishes with more than just salt and pepper. As guitarists, we need to do the exact same thing with our scale shapes. The good news is that if you've already memorized all of these scale shapes, you have everything you need to start adding in some more flavor to your phrases. So if you're stuck in that kind of scale box kind of sound, here's what you need to do to make your phrases sound more musical. So the first thing we're going to do is take a scale shape that you already know. It doesn't really matter what it is. It could be a major scale shape, a pentatonic. Again, it doesn't matter. For the example in this video, I'm going to pick this A Dorian scale shape. Just because I really like the sound of this A Dorian kind of scale. So instead of playing through it kind of step by step like this, we're going to find the root this scale comes from. So this is A Dorian. So we're going to find places where we can play this A root note. I have this A over here on the D string. And again, most people when they're trying to play a phrase from A, they'll kind of do something like that, or they'll just go stepwise up the scale. What we're going to practice instead is looking at the different intervals we can find from this note that's inside of this scale shape, right? So instead of jumping up a semitone to that note over there, we can go to the minor third over here, we have a perfect fourth right underneath. We have that perfect fifth over here. We've got a major sixth. I've got a minor seventh. And I have my root over here. You'll notice that you actually already recognize these notes because they're still inside of that scale shape that you already know how to play. If you've been practicing these shapes, you already know which frets your fingers are supposed to land on. Now we're just kind of understanding what intervals they are in relation to these root notes. So we can experiment with combining them in different ways. So instead of kind of going from like here to here, I can jump immediately to like this note. And that creates a more interesting sounding phrase. It makes things less predictable. Again, you don't always want to be doing really large jumps. That can be kind of confusing. You want to mix and match them with large jumps and then scale runs, which makes like your phrases kind of sound more complete and kind of structured. But again, this isn't the end, right? You can use any kind of scale note that you want and kind of just experiment with adding things together by following that framework of the scale shape that you've already practiced. But we can take this up another notch. Again, we need to understand that this A Dorian scale, it comes from the A minor chord, which means we can also find an A minor triad inside of this scale shape. So we have a root, we have a minor third, and a fifth. Again, all of those are notes inside of this A Dorian scale shape. So we're going to do the exact same thing now, where we find a note, jump to a bigger interval, and now we're going to try doing that for the minor third. And we can even do that from the fifth. So when I combine them all together, we get those bigger, more kind of unexpected leaps in our phrasing, which makes things sound so much more colourful. So you can see what I'm doing there is I'm not practicing just going and memorizing the shape. We already have the shape memorized. What we need to practice now is ways to jump around this scale to make our phrases sound more interesting by continuously kind of just going up and down and practicing like this. That's not practicing how to make music. To make music, we have to do these intervallic jumps and leaps and create some kind of surprise for the listener. So when I start trying to combine everything together, I can get some really interesting, unexpected melodic contours in my solos, just like this. So thinking in terms of the intervals inside of your scale shapes that you already know how to play is instantly going to shift how your phrasing sounds. You'll still be using the exact same shape that you've practiced, but now your melodies are going to sound more intentional and they're not going to sound like you're just tracing a pattern and following through a shape. If you're an intermediate guitarist and you're tired of just guessing your way through solos and you're ready to follow a proven path that's finally going to help you unlock improvisation across the fretboard, then I'd be happy to work with you personally in my intermediate transformation program. This is where we go in depth following a step-by-step method to build the tools, confidence and clarity you need to create solos that actually sound like music and not just patterns. If that sounds like something that you need, head to my website. There's going to be a link in the description and the pinned comment to get started. Now, YouTube videos are great, but they can't give you feedback. They can't keep you on track, and that's what this program is for. So if you're ready to start playing the way you've always wanted to on the instrument, you can book a free trial with me. Again, link is in the description. I look forward to seeing you soon.